Major video for today, and hopefully you've had a chance the last 2 days to watch the other Von Thunen videos that I've posted for you on YouTube. Those guys do a great job presenting this agricultural model. I want to review some key things and maybe spend a little more time with some stuff that they go through quickly. Please contemplate and study this model closely over the next 3 to 4 days. You will not get any new material. Some review stuff will be posted, but no new material until Monday. Okay, but this is really important that you spend time with Von Thunen. Hopefully you've learned through these first 2 videos on YouTube, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, again, go back to the last 2 days, your folders and your updates to see those 2 videos, and you really need to watch those first, and then go through this with me. Von Thunen's model is about agriculture. Heinrich von Thunen was a German geographer in the 1800s, early 1800s, and what he wanted to figure out was, why do certain types of agriculture occur in certain locations? The why of where for agriculture. That was his whole issue. Now, that was 200 years ago. Obviously, the world has changed a lot. So much like Malthus, there's going to be some criticisms of this model. Remember that models simplify a complicated world, which in essence mean they're always going to be wrong for the most part. It's just how wrong are they going to be? And what we look at then is, how have they changed and why have they changed? So the name of the book or the essay that Von Thunen wrote was called The Isolated State, and it was about German agriculture. Now that's important because the isolated state gives the idea that Germany acted on its own. And by acting on its own, Germany was not in a global market to sell their food to other people, but instead, Germany was basically just whatever products were produced in Germany were sold to Germans. And so with that being the case, the isolated state means that every farmer was selling to a single market. That was the assumption. Today, we know that's not the case. If you're on a farm and you're growing stuff, you may sell stuff to people on the internet, around the world, or another part of the country, another part of the region, all that. So here's things that they didn't focus on a whole lot on those videos that I want you to be able to, first of all, it's in OneNote, Von Thunen model in OneNote. If you scroll down, you'll see a lot of drawings and graphics, but things to consider. All right, Von Thunen's model was created before major industrialization, and here are assumptions. Remember, all models make assumptions so that they can simplify. But for every assumption, this is very important for your FRQ potential, for every assumption, there is a criticism because assumptions are too simplified. So his first assumption is that all land, soil quality, and climate are consistent throughout the land being mapped. Guys, you know that's not realistic. Not all soil quality is the same. It can change pretty quickly. Not all climate's always going to be the same. So while that's an assumption, it's also then a criticism to say rarely will the soil be the same or the climate. You can have a mountain range too. Because another assumption he makes is the physical geography. The land is completely flat and has no rivers or mountains. Again, there's no way that's going to be the case everywhere. It may be the case in Oklahoma, but it's not going to be the case in other places. And so therefore, the land being completely flat, no rivers or mountains, it's an assumption that helps a model become more accurate. But it also makes it inaccurate when you don't have land like that. Third assumption. Transportation can be basically moving a straight line to the market as the crow flies. Roads usually don't go in a straight line. It's kind of like somebody said, well, if I could get to your house and, fly like a crow, if you could just take a straight line, you could be there quicker. For whatever reason, transportation sometimes weaves and curves and all that, and the roads do. He's assuming all transportation is kind of in a sharp, direct, straight point. Also, he's saying the city is located centrally within the isolated state, which is then self-sufficient. In other words, it's like a functional region where there's no influence with anything outside of your functional region. The city is the node. I think Krista pointed this out yesterday and was asking a question about it. The city becomes the node of the nodal region, and the area around it is its functional region. They're working together. Not all the time. Criticism. Is the city going to be in the center of an agriculturally functional region, though? All right. Next assumption, farmers act to maximize profits and not only that, but minimize cost. In other words, they raise crops to make money. This is a model about commercial agriculture. And while it's true that most commercial farmers do raise crops to make money, sometimes there might be other reasons. And if there's another reason, that's going to be a criticism of the model. Next assumption, there are no other factors that would influence what is grown, such as government regulations or policies. So he's not including anything the government might do. He is totally thinking, von Thunen, when he comes up with this model, people are going to grow what's going to make them the most money. So they're going to decide where they're going to grow their stuff based on that solely. What if the government says, we'll pay you this much extra if you'll grow cotton or if you'll grow or raise cattle? That's going to impact things. So there's a criticism. The isolated state is surrounded by an unoccupied wilderness. Von Thunen believed, this is back in the days when distance decay was more profoundly true, that once you got so far away from the city, you were so far away that you didn't have a connectivity anymore, gravity model. And so therefore, outside of that last ring of von Thunen's model, and if you've looked at it, you know it's about rings in a circle, then it might as well be a wilderness because it's disconnected. It's like I started to say pastoral nomadism, which is kind of right, but it's like stage one once you get beyond that outer circle. And there's another slide or two actually here that talks more about the arguments of von Thunen. For example, this one shows you a mathematical formula you could actually use based on his idea that you need to maximize your profits. So you're going to pick a spot in von Thunen's model. You're going to pick a spot to put your crop or buy land or rent land. See, rent per unit of land versus how much do you yield. Some crops require more land. That means they're called extensive. Others require less and are of more value. That's intensive. So depending on if you have an extensive producing crop or an intensive, depends where you go in the circle. Spoiler, intensive agriculture is going to take place more toward the center. Extensive is going to take more toward the periphery and on the outside. Some other important notes of the model. Again, criticism, not all soils the same. Topography, physical geography, actually varies. Transportation costs are not equal depending on how far away you are. The invention of refrigeration changed everything because also in this model, there is the perishability factor. If you grow a crop that is perishable, therefore you have a timetable to get it to the market before it spoils, then obviously you're going to grow that crop closer to the market. Now with refrigerated trucks and cars and all that, planes, that changes the game. Not only physical, but social, political, and cultural factors might affect agricultural location. In other words, if a group of people don't believe that a certain crop is good for their culture, they might not grow it. Or something that's very, they're very positive about, they may grow. One other thing you must know, this is another theory that is manipulated inside of this theory or model. It is something called the bid-rent theory or the bid-rent curve. And the bid-rent theory or bid-rent curve is pretty easy, guys. The idea, you need to understand this to understand von Thunen's model. Bid-rent theory is estimating the price of land in relative location to the city center. So the center of the circle, the city. Remember the dot in von Thunen's model, you're going to see in a minute, it's the city. Just the dot's the city. All the rings are then agricultural land, and they're all judged on where are they relatively to the city. According to bid-rent theory, you can measure the value of land based on how far away it is from the city. Land of the most value, you must know this, according to bid-rent curve, is like near downtown, somewhere in a downtown area of a city, according to this theory, will be the most expensive land. It's kind of like Morristown near downtown. That land is very expensive because there's a lot of traffic that goes by it all the time. And so busy intersections, those are high value land areas. Downtown Knoxville. Notice in downtown Knoxville, buildings are built up vertically. That's because the land is so expensive, so they build up to save money and get the most value. As you leave downtown Knoxville or downtown Morristown, according to bid-rent theory in any city, the further you get away, you will see a gradual decline in prices. of land and rent of land. In general, that is pretty true. It's pretty true here in Morristown. It's pretty true in Knoxville. Now, a criticism of this model is it's not always that way. Think about this. Does the lake change the cost of land in Morristown? If you get 15 miles away from downtown toward the lake, is that the same cost of land if you go 15 miles the opposite direction? The bottom line is it's not. So that's a criticism of this model. But in general, this is pretty accurate. Think about leaving Knoxville, expensive land downtown, and then as you make it further and further away and you go through Granger County and Hawkins County and then get to Hancock County, land prices are a lot cheaper. So you can do more extensive agricultural activities. So bid rent theory basically states there is a place near the city, in the city, not near the city, in the city, downtown, that is the most expensive value of land. And then that value of land decreases in all directions, like a circle, as you move away from the city center. Show you this graphic. If this is the city right here in the middle, let me get a little better view here for you. If this is the city in the center, bid rent theory, notice this little action here, and you can freeze this on the video and use this, maybe draw it yourself if you want to. Land prices decrease as you move out, and this is called bid rent theory. Make sure you know how to use that. They may ask you about that. Also, notice these rings. The city is the dot. Perishable products will likely be grown closest to the city. Now, I'm not going to spend a long time going over these types of agriculture because the two other videos do that. But you know what types of commercial agriculture make you more money. Like selling milk and selling fruits and vegetables per unit is pretty profitable. It's also expensive to do, but it's profitable. So because you get more value out of milk and fruits and vegetables, and also because they're perishable, you grow them closer to the city because there is a high demand for fruits and vegetables to be fresh and for milk not to perish. And so in von Thunen's original model, he believed, okay, these two need to be very close to the city. And they were historically. Today, one of them still is, fruits and vegetables, but dairy is not so much anymore because of refrigeration. So let's talk about how this all fits. Fruit and vegetables and dairy, you may see in some graphs, are shown in the same ring. And guys, that's fine. It's accurate. But some versions of the model subdivide this. And if you choose to subdivide it, you must know which one goes closer. Fruits and vegetables will go closer to the city because they require less land, and this land's going to be expensive. They don't require a lot of land, like a garden. They don't require as much land, so you can buy more or rent more expensive land, and you have a short haul of getting the product to the market, which means it won't spoil or damage as quick. You won't get damaged as much. High value, you can afford higher priced land, and the perishability means fruits and vegetables are going to be the closest crop, according to von Thunen, to the city. Next closest is the dairies. Now, the dairies require a little bit more land than fruits and vegetables, but dairy cattle are not like the ranching we talked about. Dairy cattle are fed a lot. They have a little bit of pasture, but not much, where they pick grass, and then they're milked, and then the milk can be sent here. Dairy can produce money. So you can afford to buy and rent some pretty expensive land, but you got to have expensive equipment. And you also need to get it to the market quickly. At least back in those days, you did. So fruit and vegetables and dairy will be in generally the same zones or circular rings. But if they don't subdivide it and they only give you like 4 rings, then put fruits and vegetables and dairy together. Now, let's review something. At the end of the day, von Thunen determines the most important factor in answering why of where is location, relative location, and transportation cost. That's something you need to know. Why does fruits and vegetables, why can they be produced here? Because it's going to cost a lot of money to transport fruits and vegetables from way out here. And you got to do it quickly, and you can't damage them. Dairy, it's going to cost, back in those days, now today it's not as bad because of refrigeration. Again, that's how the models changed. it's going to cost a lot of money to get dairy products here to here and to keep them fresh. So it's about transportation. It's about cost of transportation and relative distance. Now, in the original model, this next ring, von Thunen said, was the forest ring. Now, that's interesting because this is the way the model has changed. Now, back in those days, 200 years ago, von Thunen was pretty accurate. Most cities had a forested area about 30 miles away. Because think about it. What did you build everything out of in 1800? Wood. Your homes, what did you keep your homes warm with? Wood. How did you get wood to the market? You typically floated it down a river. You didn't have the trucks like we had today, or even really trains yet, maybe a few. But so forests were close to the city, so you could get the raw materials to the houses, to the market, to wherever it needed to go. And the river part means that this circular idea of the model is not incredibly accurate. And so some newer models, and you see one on OneNote, actually draw a river right through here. The river would go like right through the city, this way, or this way. And so then instead of circles, these might be like little wedges. And then you would float the timber down the river. Today, we don't just build out of wood. We have other ways to heat our homes. And so therefore, this area is totally been deleted basically from the model. And you could say it's way out here in the hinterlands somewhere. Hinterlands, by the way, is this area on the outer periphery. If you ever hear of hinterlands, hinterlands are this area outside the circle. It's the edges. It's like periphery. Hinterlands, periphery of an area. So forests were in the original model, but not anymore. The next type of agriculture is grain farming. Now, grain farming, this is like in the American Midwest. This is the area where we grow our cereals and stuff like that. And this is an area of farming that requires quite a bit of land. You've ever been out in those parts of the country, you know there's large fields of corn, large fields of grain. By the time you've got out here, according to bid rent theory, the land is cheaper. So if you need a lot of land, you can buy it at a cheaper price. And grain really will not spoil. So you can, transportation cost, although you're going to travel a longer distance, you don't have to worry about spoilage. So that helps a lot, and that's why grains can be grown out in this area relatively. And then finally, livestock ranching. Livestock ranching is like what we do near the Rocky Mountains, Colorado, Texas. It's the cattle that are out up in open spaces and marginal land. You need a lot of land for the cattle to eat on. This land is going to be relatively cheap. There's actually a lot of cattle that are raised in Hancock County. Land is relatively cheap, okay? A lot of cattle raised in Granger, Hawkins County. Land is relatively cheap compared to, say, Hamlin or Knox County. So livestock ranching takes place out here. Some of you might be wondering, well, but the cattle have to get to the market when you slaughter them. I hope you're wondering that. I hope that thought crossed your mind. Here's the trick. Do the cattle get taken, live cattle, to the city and say, okay, here's your cow, have fun with supper? I don't think so. They're going to be taken to what you remember is called the feedlot. Remember the mixed crop and livestock part. So where would the feedlot be? And you may want to pause the video for a minute and see if you can figure that out, because that would be a good FRQ type question that you can't really look up. You got to figure out. Where would the feedlot be? The place where they put the animals in close quarters and fatten them up and get them ready for slaughter. Guys, the feedlots would be right in here. Okay? Now, I'm even being really specific, and I say right in here all the way around this circle. They would be on the inner part of the grains, most likely. How do I know that? Because what are these grains being grown for? Not just people food, but also to fatten the animals. And if you fatten the animals near the grains, and you could do it here too, but it makes more sense to do it in here, the feedlots don't require as much land. So I would probably fatten the animals in here and then grow the grains that require more land out here, feed it to the animals. Here's where the slaughterhouses are going to be. And then once the animal's slaughtered, you're going to lessen the weight. So the meat that's packaged will actually be less weight than the total animal was. I had to go pick up some packaged meat the other day, and out of an 800-900 pound animal, there's 200 pounds of meat. So that's going to cheapen your transport. That 200 pounds isn't going to be taken to the market. Now, it will need to be refrigerated at this point, but it's a shorter distance than it would be if it was out here. So notice some key words here that we're using. Intensive agricultural activities are taking place near the center, extensive out here near the periphery. Also, everything is about relative location. Everything is relative to the city. Another word for the city is the market. The market you're selling your product. Von Thunen made this model believing every farmer was selling to one market. That's not true today, but maybe back then it was more. Also, distance decay. The further away you are from the city, the less connection there is to the city and the different crops that are grown. Okay, that also is important. Now, scroll on down here, key concepts. Non-perishable crops. Live animals are not perishable. Now, once you slaughter them, they are. Grains are not perishable. So they're grown in these outer areas near the hinterlands. Also, you can use the word periphery for these areas on the edges. This hopefully helps you understand how this is all a functioning region or a functional region. Here's your node. These people are farming to supply things to the node. They're going to eat from stuff out here. Again, the city is the dot. This is fruits and vegetables. This is dairy, forest, grains, livestock ranching. And then on the left-hand side, you see some additional vocabulary that we've already mentioned, I believe most of. Intensive agriculture versus extensive agriculture. Also bid rent theory and perishability. You also see over here land use. You've had some questions on FRQs, probably a little unfair to have asked you about so far, but those things are not hard grades in the Power School. So I wanted you to give it a shot. So now you should understand land use better. This urban land use in the city is going to be more compact. They're going to use it for factories and homes and stuff like that. Whereas the land use here is going to be for intensive agriculture. Labor intensive and there's a difference. Labor intensive and capital intensive. Fruit and vegetable farming is both, but it's more labor intensive because remember, you need more hands-on. Dairy farming is a little less labor intensive, a little bit, but it's more capital intensive. In other words, you got to have a lot of money put in. These on the periphery are a lot less labor intensive and not as much capital intensive as the ones toward the center. Okay, so this is Von Thunen's model. Now, I want one more thing to go over with you, and this is such an important model, and therefore we're spacing out over several days. We're actually going to still be talking about it on Monday of next week. How would you criticize the model in the modern day? What has changed? Quick review, bullet points. You may want to jot these notes down, freezing the video. Number one, there is no forest area anymore because we now make our homes and heat our homes out of different stuff other than forest. So this forest area is gone. Number two, technology has allowed all of these rings, for the most part, to disperse. They have spread out. They don't have to be near a city anymore. The only one that's sort of like it used to be is fruits and vegetable farming because the perishability and high demand of richer people. So that one's still pretty accurate. Even dairy farming, remember the milk shed idea? It now is more clustered far away from the city because of refrigeration. These others, America, you'll see more about that on Monday, has also changed. So there's two things that have changed. A third thing that is big that has changed is we are not producing agricultural products anymore for a single market. Most farmers are producing now for numerous markets, regional, national, even international. So that is a third major change. So the loss of the forest being that close, that region, the spreading of all of these types of agriculture, and then thirdly, this idea that you have many markets instead of one. Those are the go-to answers for changes in this model. Now, are there many other things you could talk about? Sure. Please review the assumptions, the criticisms, study the model, watch the two videos again. They do such a great job that I could have made 3 or 4 videos myself, but I thought those videos were exceptionally good on YouTube. Look over this stuff, okay? Look at it in different forms. This one puts marketing, gardening, and dairy farming in the same zone. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you subdivide it, the marketing and gardening will be closer. So look over all these. Here's a new one. I think a new one. This is one that's modified for a river. This is probably more reasonable. And instead of having like full circles, it's more like a semicircle surrounding the river. Here's another one where the river runs through it. I kind of like this one. And so you have kind of wedges outward of what kind of crops are taking place. And you figure out where you might have crop rotation. But look over this. If you have questions, we're going to talk about this stuff on Monday. Please let me know. Again, I'm checking my stuff, and even over the weekend, I will check at least twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day. Guys, I want to give you feedback. I do need your participation. So again, encourage people, get on the FRQs. I have some plans that could really help you guys down the road. I think you're going to really like the idea, but the only way I can implement all those plans is going to depend on more participation on FRQ. So encourage those people who are behind. They can send them to me in Microsoft Word, whatever they need to, and that's the way we'll get done. Let me know if you have questions. Learn about von Thunen, okay?